100 days ago, I bought the M5 iPad Pro 13-inch. Of all the iPads that I've owned, the Pro is the one I've always avoided. Because, let's be real, with iPad Pro money, you could just buy a laptop. But if I'm not looking for a laptop replacement, could the iPad Pro still be something special for a casual user like me? I gave myself 100 days to find out, and by the end, I was going to decide to either keep it or to go back to my iPad mini. Let's begin with the first pro feature of this tablet, the screen. This 13-inch tandem OLED screen with ProMotion at 120Hz is an exclusive feature of the Pro. And if you buy the 1TB version, you unlock the nano texture screen. But I didn't go that far. As someone who was used to looking at the iPad mini screen and occasionally photo editing on it, I never complained about the screen experience. But once I started using the Pro, that's when things really started to change. All the colors of YouTube that I once saw were suddenly more vibrant. The frames that I saw on Netflix were a lot more contrasty, and the blacks and all the bright colors are just wow. Over the course of time that I've used the iPad mini, the less I've used it for entertainment. But since owning the iPad Pro, entertainment started coming back into my overall tablet experience, especially gaming, but more on that later. As great as the screen is, some people have complained about OLED flicker. In my 1 to 3 hour sessions, I had no issues. However, with all that screen real estate, I have started to wonder what else that I could do with it. I do a lot of handwriting on my iPad. I journal morning pages and I take notes while studying. I'm learning a new language. I never felt like I needed more room on the iPad mini, but the iPad Pro really made me appreciate all that space. I forgot what it was like to have more space to rest my palm. I could visualize the big open space of a page, which in my mind gives me a sense of a clear headspace, which sounds corny, but it actually adds up. Plus, with all that writing, my hand never felt cramped while trying to write on the screen, as I would often feel on the mini. But you can't talk about handwriting without talking about the pencil. When Apple released the Apple Pencil Pro, they gave it the squeeze feature. Initially, I thought the idea was overrated. But then YouTuber Everyday Tech Dad mentioned how he was using it to toggle between his eraser and his normal writing mode. Turns out he was onto something. Since experiencing the squeeze feature myself, I no longer want to go to an Apple Pencil without it. Let's be real though, a pencil alone isn't enough to justify buying, let alone keeping, this iPad. So I continued to think of how else I could be more productive with the iPad Pro. So when it came to my studies, I used the split screening feature. I put ChatGPT on the left to help me translate words, and I kept Notability on the right for when I wrote down examples to reinforce practice. In this orientation, I felt like I had two iPad minis side by side, and I never felt like I didn't have enough room. If I did want more room, I could always just slide over the split screen a little bit more to the left or to the right. But one thing I didn't expect about the iPad was how it gets noticeably warmer after an hour or two of writing. The iPad didn't shut off, but all the heat on my palm did make me stop for a bit. As a casual iPad user, I thought I would stop here with my Pro experience. But then I remembered you can screen share with your macOS devices. This is something I hardly ever did with my iPad mini, but with my magnetic arm, I started using the iPad Pro as a secondary monitor. Sometimes I vibe coded, other times I multitasked with tabs, and then of course I added the occasional shows. It was nice to have a second screen. In this manner, I was able to have a second screen that increased my productivity and leisure without having to take up too much desk space. I could really just drag and drop windows back and forth wirelessly between my Mac mini and the iPad Pro without feeling any lag. Before I knew it, the iPad Pro had started to become more a part of my life than the iPad mini ever was. But there's one activity where the large screen was a disadvantage: reading. Yes, it's beautiful when it comes to having that real estate to read, whether vertical or horizontal. But how you read really makes a difference. If you read at a desk or any table, it's no problem. But once you start resting it in your lap or holding it in your hand, after a while, the size and weight starts to add up. When I'm reading music pieces for church, I have to use two hands. I miss being able to use a single hand to hold my iPad mini. But if I'm carrying the iPad and trying to operate it at the same time, it also starts to wear me down. Now, unlike our favorite aunties and uncles, I don't use this iPad to take photos or videos, but I have tried to edit them on this device. In terms of processing, rendering, and exporting photos, there was hardly any difference when comparing to the iPad mini. The only noticeable difference when photo editing between these devices was really just the screen size. In terms of video editing, I put together a vlog on LumaFusion. The overall experience was smooth for basic editing, and having the larger screen to be able to see the timeline, file browser, and preview window was a plus. While it was nice to be able to edit on a 13-inch screen, I don't believe you need to own the Pro just to have the same experience. However, it's a different story when it comes to gaming. Now, Apple devices aren't exactly known for gaming, but the iPad Pro can deliver on a quality experience. There is a catch though. While I had nothing but an excellent experience while playing Call of Duty Mobile, there was something to note when playing Fortnite. I was able to maintain a smooth and steady gameplay of 120 frames per second on medium graphics. For me, I was impressed that I could sustain those 120 frames per second compared to something like the Nintendo Switch, which caps out at 60. At least that's what I've heard. The catch is that sometimes when you overuse your iPad, you start dropping frames. So at some point, I was only getting like 15 and less than 10 frames per second when it came to Fortnite. Fortunately, gaming wasn't the only way I was able to experience high quality graphics. I finally decided to take my basic 3D modeling skills to the iPad with Shaper 3D. And it actually wasn't bad. I was impressed by how much I could actually do and how smooth the designing process was on an iPad. Normally I design on my Mac Mini with Fusion 360, but since 3D modeling on the iPad, I don't think I want to go back. At this point, the iPad Pro had really grown on me, and for the first time, I was leaning towards keeping it. For as much as I was using it during the day, even the battery life was keeping up with me, even better than me. There were times when I didn't touch the iPad for a day or two, but when I looked at the battery life, it was still at like 70%. When I did that with the iPad mini, it wouldn't even turn on after day 2. But there's still something that we can't ignore about the iPad. Unfortunately, when you buy an iPad, you don't just buy an iPad. The iPad Pro 13-inch 256GB version is $1,299. Add the Pencil Pro, it's $129. A case like the Moth Dynamic Folio, $69. And a screen protector from Paperlike, $50. That's over $1,500 before you even think about a keyboard or AppleCare. For the price of this setup, you could buy a MacBook Air and almost buy a different iPad. But after spending 100 days with the iPad Pro, who is this really for? This has always been for the professional and anybody else who wants to invest in the high quality experience that this device brings. For older iPad users, you could upgrade for the Apple Pencil Pro and a newer chip, but you're probably good where you're at. For most of us, the iPad Air makes sense, especially since they released their new M4 version, which also comes in at a 13-inch variation. It's got the features and performance that most people would want and never need, and at a better price. If you wanted a more portable size, then the Mini is still the way to go. For me, after 100 days with the iPad Pro, I decided to keep it. Despite the shortcomings, it's hard to ignore the day-to-day value that it brings me. And it makes me love it in ways that a laptop couldn't replace. Thinking about getting a new iPad? Check out these accessories that I have right over here.